Talaris Ven had faced many surprises in his life, but he never expected one to come in the form of a human bride. Or at least, that was what he told himself. Sitting in the observation chamber aboard the diplomatic cruiser Serene Dawn, he stared at the transport bay where his bride was scheduled to arrive. According to every report he had read, humans were small, unpredictable, and simple. They were creatures of emotion, often irrational, and yet astonishingly adaptable. This combination had fascinated his species for centuries. Though few admitted it openly, the Alliance required this union. The Council of the Interstellar Coalition had made it clear. The human species needed a connection to the Ven Collective. And Talaris was the ideal representative. He had trained for decades to ensure such duties would not distract him from his work. But duty, however vital, could never prepare him for the human presence. Talaris straightened his uniform, checking the insignia on his chest, the mark of his diplomatic rank. He had done everything by the book. Rehearsed greetings, prepared speeches, even memorized the likely topics a human bride would bring up. Logic dictated that this would be a short, formal encounter, followed by months of polite silence. He felt ready. Or so he thought. The doors of the transport bay hissed open, and a beam of warm light flooded the chamber. Talaris felt a subtle pull at his senses, a tension he could not explain. His predictive algorithms had failed to account for the human arrival. He waited, rigid, as the shadows shifted. Then she stepped forward. Elena Marrow moved with a grace that was quiet but deliberate. She did not stumble. She did not hesitate. Every step was measured, confident, yet soft enough to convey respect. Talaris had expected a trembling figure, a creature overwhelmed by alien technology and the grandeur of his presence. Instead, he found a woman who stood straight, eyes bright with curiosity, yet calm. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty alone was not what unnerved him. It was the presence she carried, the way her gaze scanned the room, observing without judgment, understanding without explanation. She smiled faintly, not at him, not at the ceremony, but at the world as though she had already learned its hidden patterns. "Greetings, Ambassador Ven," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I am Elena Marrow." Talaris paused, unsure how to respond. The syllables were correct, the intonation flawless. Yet something about the simplicity of her words made him uneasy. Normally, humans gushed, faltered, or stuttered in formal alien settings. She did not. She spoke clearly, deliberately, as if each word were chosen with care. "Welcome, Miss Marrow," he finally said. His tone was formal, precise, and carefully devoid of emotion. He gestured to the chairs in the chamber. "Please, have a seat." Elena inclined her head gracefully and took a chair, settling into it with a poise that seemed almost unnatural to his trained observation. She did not fidget. She did not scan for escape routes. She simply sat, observing him as much as he observed her. Talaris felt a strange flutter in his chest. It was not fear, not exactly, but it was something his species did not often recognize in themselves. Uncertainty. His predictive models faltered. Every data point he had on human brides suggested compliance, simplicity, and timidity. Elena offered none of these. He cleared his throat and began the formalities. "Your travel was comfortable?" "Yes," she replied. "The transport pods are efficient. I was surprised, though, by how quiet the cruiser is. It feels peaceful." Her use of the word peaceful caught him off guard. Peaceful was not a word humans typically used when describing a space vessel. Most would have complained about the noise, the smells, or the vibration, yet she noticed peace. She could find calm in something mechanical and alien. He nodded, unsure if he had done it correctly. Diplomacy, he reminded himself, was not only about words, it was about reading responses. But here, the usual patterns did not apply. "You will find the Ven collective values," he began, attempting to follow protocol: compliance, respect, and adherence to tradition. "These qualities are appreciated." Elena tilted her head slightly. considering his words. I understand. I also believe that respect can exist even when one questions tradition. And compliance. Well, it can be mutual. She smiled faintly, not mockingly, but in a way that suggested she knew more than she let on. Talaris's chest tightened. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. His algorithms were screaming internally, though his outward form remained calm. This human was not simple. She was dangerous in the way humans could be dangerous through intelligence, perception, and subtle strength. For the first time, he felt what his people rarely allowed themselves: awe. The formal introductions continued, but Talaris found it increasingly difficult to focus. Elena asked questions, not many, but insightful ones. Why does your council favor silence in conversation? She asked at one point. Is it respect or fear of disagreement? He blinked. No human had ever asked that. Most accepted authority blindly, but she did not. She questioned gently, thoughtfully, without challenging, yet still challenging the way only humans could. It is tradition, he replied carefully. It is also efficient. She nodded. Efficiency can be useful, but sometimes it hides opportunity. Opportunity. Talaris felt the word strike him like a minor shock. Humans saw possibility where his species saw order. They could navigate chaos and find potential. And she, this human, was living proof. The rest of the day passed in similar fashion. Elena explored the cruiser. Not as a tourist, but as an observer. She asked about life support, studied the star charts, and engaged with the crew, who were initially wary. She never overstepped, never demanded attention, but gradually won trust with her simple confidence. Talaris followed her at a distance, noticing how she noticed things. The way she adjusted a loose panel in the cargo bay, not out of duty but curiosity. The way she offered small words of encouragement to the nervous communications officer. The way she smiled at the stars as if she could read them like an open book. By the evening, he found himself standing alone in the observation deck, staring out at the galaxy, thinking of her. What frightened him most was not her strength. It was what her presence made him feel. A stirring he did not understand. Something warm and unpredictable. A pulse of humanity he had never allowed himself to experience. And for someone trained in logic, in control, in discipline, that was terrifying. The transport logs called her a simple bride. The council expected her to be compliant, but Elena Marrow was no one's expectation, and as Talaris watched her silhouette move gracefully through the corridor, he understood a truth that made him uneasy. Humans, at their best, were not predictable, and perhaps they were not meant to be. He straightened his back and inhaled deeply. Tomorrow would be the first formal meeting with the council representatives. He was supposed to maintain composure, speak formally, and ensure that nothing went wrong. Yet in the quiet of the observation deck, Talaris allowed himself one small, forbidden thought. Perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy had underestimated humanity. The next morning, the cruiser's serene dawn glided silently through the endless black of space. Stars stretched like scattered diamonds across the void, and Talaris Ven found himself unusually aware of them. Normally, he would have concentrated only on his duties, memorized protocols, and ensured flawless conduct for the coming council meeting. But Elena Marrow had a way of lingering in his thoughts, as if her presence had reshaped the very air around him. Elena, meanwhile, was already awake in her quarters. She had spent the early hours reviewing the information packets provided by the council, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of reading each document from beginning to end, she skimmed them, focusing on patterns, contradictions, and the unspoken assumptions behind every line. Her mind worked quickly, connecting dots that others had ignored for decades. When Talaris arrived for the morning briefing, he found her seated at the table in his designated conference room, carefully arranging data pads in neat piles. The room smelled faintly of recycled air and metal, but she appeared undistracted, her attention fully on the task at hand. "Good morning, Ambassador Ven," she said calmly, without looking up. "I hope you rested well." Talaris paused. A human greeting this formal yet confident was unusual. Most would have stumbled, fumbled, or added unnecessary warmth. Elena's tone was simple, but there was a clarity in it that made him uneasy. "Good morning, Miss Marrow," he replied, taking his seat across from her. "I trust your quarters are satisfactory?" "They are," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were bright, intelligent, and full of a quiet curiosity that seemed to pierce through the rigid structure of his training. "Though I notice the water recycling system seems less efficient than your reports indicated. I may have suggestions." Talaris's chest tightened. Suggestions. A bride was not supposed to make suggestions, especially not about a cruiser operated by his people. Yet Elena did so without arrogance. Without disrespect. It was subtle, almost gentle, yet profoundly destabilizing. He cleared his throat. "Your observations are noted. Perhaps we may discuss them later, if time allows." Elena nodded, her expression neutral but perceptive. "Of course. Efficiency is important. But so is understanding why systems are designed a certain way. I like to know the reasons before making changes." Talaris felt a flicker of admiration he quickly tried to suppress. Understanding reasons, not blind compliance. That was distinctly human. His people valued order, obedience, and predictability. Humans valued something else: insight, curiosity, and courage in small, quiet forms. The rest of the morning was spent in formal training sessions. Elena observed diplomatic procedures, ceremonial gestures, and council protocols. She learned quickly, mimicking the gestures with precision and memorizing speeches with ease. What unsettled Talaris most was her ability to adapt. She did not merely repeat, she improved. At one point, Talaris demonstrated a standard greeting protocol: a slow bow, precise hand placement, and carefully modulated vocal tone. Most humans would have struggled with the rhythm, timing, and subtle eye contact. Elena performed flawlessly, but then added a tiny adjustment to the gesture, one that made the movement more fluid and graceful. "It will be more comfortable for the council members," she explained simply. "They will recognize respect, but not feel constrained by formality." Talaris blinked. Comfort. Recognition. She understood impact, not just procedure. This was more than adaptation. It was insight. His people, the Ven, had always dismissed humans as emotional, irrational, and reactive. Yet Elena seemed capable of thinking beyond rules, of seeing the wider effect of her actions. Later, in a quiet corridor lined with observation windows, Elena paused to watch the stars. Talaris followed at a respectful distance, unable to resist the urge to study her as she studied the universe. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly without turning, "why humans were always underestimated?" Talaris considered the question. "Because your species is young," he said cautiously. "Because you act impulsively. Because your reasoning is different from what other species expect." Elena smiled faintly. "Different does not mean less. Sometimes, the greatest strengths appear chaotic to those who cannot see them." Her words lingered. Talaris felt a strange, stirring curiosity mixed with unease. His species prided themselves on control and certainty. Elena had shown him glimpses of possibility, and the thought that humans might indeed possess strengths far beyond what he had been taught was disorienting. The day passed with more lessons, more quiet observations, and subtle challenges. Elena asked questions about the Council's history, their reasoning for alliances, and the consequences of past decisions. Each question was polite, carefully worded. But each one exposed assumptions that Talaris had never considered. During a break, the crew gathered in the common area, curious about the human bride. Many whispered doubts humans were unpredictable, after all. But Elena approached them not as a guest to impress or command, but as a learner and observer. She listened, responded thoughtfully, and occasionally offered solutions that were both practical and elegant. Talaris watched from the corner. The crew began to warm to her, smiles replacing skepticism. yet he could feel his own composure slipping. The calm detachment he relied upon for decades was faltering. He was drawn to her not romantically yet, but intellectually, emotionally, and undeniably. By evening, the official council simulation was scheduled. This exercise was designed to test diplomatic skill, crisis resolution, and interspecies understanding. Elena entered the simulation room with calm confidence, reviewing the scenario with quiet concentration. Talaris noted how she interacted with the holographic models, how she anticipated reactions, and how she adjusted strategies on the fly. She did not dominate the exercise. She guided, suggested, and sometimes questioned assumptions. She achieved results without force, without authority, without fear. When the simulation concluded, the holographic interface dissolved, leaving only Talaris and Elena in the room. She turned to him, eyes bright with the satisfaction of learning. "That was enlightening," she said. "Your species relies heavily on structure, and yet structure alone cannot achieve understanding. Flexibility is necessary." Talaris felt a warmth in his chest, the kind he had rarely allowed himself to notice. Her words were not praise, they were observation. Yet their simplicity and truth struck him more deeply than any accolade. "I see your point," he said carefully. "Your approach is unusual." "Perhaps," she replied gently. "But unusual does not mean wrong. Sometimes, the unfamiliar path reveals what the familiar cannot." The phrase echoed in his mind. Unfamiliar paths. He had spent his life walking the narrow corridors of tradition and expectation. Elena had arrived like a sudden starburst, illuminating possibilities he had never considered. That night, Talaris returned to the observation deck. He leaned against the railing, staring out at the endless stars, trying to make sense of his feelings. Fear, admiration, curiosity all mingled in a way he had never experienced. Elena was nothing like the simple bride he had expected. She was intelligent, insightful, and quietly fearless, and he realized something both thrilling and frightening. She had already changed him. For the first time, he wondered if humans were truly as simple as his reports claimed. Perhaps the galaxy had underestimated them. Perhaps the greatest challenge was not in teaching them, but in understanding them. And perhaps he did not want to fully understand just yet. The next morning, the cruiser's serene dawn hummed softly as it glided through the dark expanse of space. Stars shimmered like silver dust scattered across an endless black canvas. Talaris Ven walked through the corridors, his mind unusually restless. Thoughts of Elena Marrow followed him like a shadow he could not shake. Elena, meanwhile, had already begun exploring the vessel in earnest. She moved with quiet purpose, observing every system, every protocol, every crew interaction. Unlike most humans, who might have been overwhelmed by the alien environment, she was curious but composed. Each corner she entered, each control panel she examined, revealed subtle intelligence and thoughtful attention. Talaris noticed how the crew responded to her. Initially wary, they gradually relaxed under her steady presence. She spoke to them as an equal, listening patiently, offering small suggestions that improved efficiency without criticizing. Where many humans might have demanded attention or respect, Elena earned it quietly. In the observation chamber, Talaris found her studying the star charts again. She had been tracing patterns, connecting dots that he had never considered significant. "You study them closely," he remarked, approaching. "The patterns are largely predictable." Elena looked up, her eyes shining with quiet excitement. "Predictable in theory, yes. But stars, like people, often behave differently in practice. Sometimes the smallest deviation can change everything." Her words were simple, yet profound. Talaris felt a strange sense of unease. His species valued predictability, order, and control. Yet here was a human who could see beyond the obvious, who embraced uncertainty as a tool rather than a threat. "You seem unafraid," he said, careful to hide the tremor in his voice. "Afraid of what?" she asked gently. "Of failure," he admitted reluctantly. of disorder. Elena smiled faintly. Fear can guide us, but it should not limit us. Humans survive because we learn to navigate fear, not because we avoid it. We adapt. We change. Talaris paused, unsure how to respond. Adaptation. Change. These were words his people rarely used beyond basic survival. And yet, watching her, he felt their truth in a way he had never expected. The day progressed with formal training sessions, but Elena approached them differently. While Talaris followed procedures meticulously, she observed, asked questions, and suggested improvements. In one simulation, she noticed that a minor adjustment in communication protocol could prevent misunderstandings between species. Talaris was impressed, though he hid it beneath a mask of professional neutrality. Later, during a break, Elena approached him quietly in a corridor. Ambassador Venn, she said softly. Why do you measure every outcome before it happens? Why do you fear uncertainty? Talaris looked away, focusing on the sleek metal walls instead of her calm gaze. It is prudent. Chaos is dangerous. The galaxy rewards caution. Caution can protect, she agreed. But it can also blind. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from trusting potential, not certainty. Her words unsettled him more than he wished to admit. He had spent decades relying on certainty. Yet she spoke of trust, possibility, and courage with the ease of someone who had always known them. And somehow, he realized, humans had these strengths in ways his species did not. As the cruiser moved closer to the council meeting location, Elena began to demonstrate a different kind of insight. She noticed subtle tensions among crew members, small hesitations, unspoken disagreements, and found ways to ease them. A quiet word here, a simple question there, and conflicts that could have escalated were resolved. Talaris watched, increasingly aware that her human strength lay not in authority, but in connection. During lunch in the common area, she engaged the crew in conversation, asking about their lives, their hopes, and their fears. Her questions were gentle, but they prompted reflections that brought surprising honesty. Talaris observed as the crew laughed, shared stories, and offered ideas. He had expected humans to be unpredictable, but Elena's approach seemed to unlock the very best of them. In the afternoon, the council simulation resumed. This time, it was more complex, involving multiple alien species and potential crises. Talaris had prepared for every scenario, relying on logic, procedure, and experience. Elena, however, approached the simulation differently. She listened carefully, observed patterns of behavior, and suggested subtle strategies that emphasized understanding and collaboration. One scenario involved a miscommunication between two alien species, which could have escalated into a serious conflict. Elena intervened, not with authority, but with empathy and careful reasoning. She asked questions that revealed hidden motivations, offered compromises that honored both sides, and guided the resolution gently. When the simulation ended, Talaris felt an unfamiliar sensation, admiration mixed with awe. The resolution had been more elegant, more humane, and more effective than any method he had ever employed. Elena had achieved success not through power, but through perception, empathy, and adaptability, qualities that his species often dismissed as weaknesses. He found himself asking questions he had never asked before. Could it be that humans, in their emotional depth and adaptability, possessed strengths that surpassed traditional measures of intelligence or authority? Could a species that seemed so young, so chaotic, actually hold the key to solving problems his people had struggled with for centuries? As the evening approached, the stars outside the observation windows glimmered faintly. Talaris and Elena stood side by side, watching the galaxy stretch into infinity. The silence between them was comfortable, yet charged with understanding. "You seem different than I expected," Talaris said finally, his voice quieter than usual. Elena tilted her head slightly, curious but calm. "Different than you expected?" "Perhaps. Humans often are. You are Stronger than your reports suggested, he admitted. She smiled. But it was not a triumphant smile, rather, a simple acknowledgement. Strength takes many forms. You see what you expect, Ambassador Ven. I show what is possible. Her words lingered in his mind as he returned to his quarters later that night. He sat alone, staring at the vessel's soft glow and the distant stars. Elena Marrow had arrived expecting to fulfill a duty, a political role, and yet she had done something unexpected. She had challenged him, quietly but profoundly, to reconsider everything he believed about humans and perhaps about himself. Talaris realized that he was no longer simply preparing for a formal meeting with the council. He was preparing to confront his own preconceptions, his own rigidity, and his own fear of uncertainty. Elena had shown him that strength could be subtle, that courage could be quiet, and that humanity's greatest power was its ability to adapt, connect, and inspire without domination. For the first time, he felt something entirely new: hope. Not hope in the reports, not hope in protocol, not hope in tradition, but hope in human potential. And that hope was both exhilarating and frightening. He thought of the council, the galaxy, and the delicate alliance that depended on this union. If Elena could teach him to see differently, what could humans teach the wider universe? He did not yet know. But for the first time, he was eager to find out. And somewhere deep inside, he admitted something he had never allowed himself to feel before. He was beginning to care not just as a diplomat, but as a person. The stars continued to shine silently outside the observation deck, a vast canvas of possibilities. And in that endless darkness, Talaris realized that the galaxy had underestimated humanity not just for their chaos, but for their quiet, unseen strength. Elena Marrow had arrived as a bride meant to obey. Instead, she had begun to teach, without intention or arrogance, the power of perception, adaptability, and courage. And Talaris Ven, trained to measure every outcome and anticipate every variable, found himself caught in the unfamiliar orbit of something unpredictable, the true depth of a human being. The cruiser's serene dawn sailed through the cold void, silent except for the soft hum of the engines. Talaris Ven walked the corridors with a sense of unease he had never experienced in his life. Normally, he moved with confidence, every step precise, every thought measured. But now, Elena Marrow lingered in his mind at every turn. She had not spoken much that morning, yet her presence had already unsettled him. Every human word, every quiet observation, challenged his rigid sense of order. He had believed that control was the highest measure of strength. Yet, standing here, he realized that humans possessed a strength he could neither predict nor control. Elena moved gracefully through the training chamber, adjusting small holographic displays, making subtle changes that improved clarity and efficiency. Talaris observed from a distance. She had already mastered the procedural aspects of the simulation exercises. But now she was adding something unexpected: creativity. Ambassador Ven, she said softly, noticing him standing in the shadows. Why do you measure every gesture and word so carefully? He paused. Because it ensures accuracy, he replied. Order is necessary. Chaos leads to failure. But sometimes, order can blind you, she said gently. Humans survive because we can adapt. We see opportunities that rigid rules cannot anticipate. Flexibility can be stronger than control. Her words struck him more than he wanted to admit. He had trained his entire life to eliminate uncertainty, to follow procedure, and to anticipate every outcome. Yet here was a human who not only embraced uncertainty, but thrived in it. The thought was frightening. Throughout the day, Elena continued to demonstrate her quiet power. She observed crew interactions, noticed subtle frustrations, and eased tensions with her words. No one forced her to intervene, yet her presence encouraged cooperation. Talaris could see it clearly. She wielded influence without authority, achieving results his people had thought impossible. At lunch, Talaris sat in silence, as Elena shared a simple meal with the crew. She asked questions, listened, and laughed softly at their stories. Her presence was calming, yet it made him aware of his own distance. He realized he had spent years adhering strictly to rules, never considering the human ability to lead through connection rather than command. Later, the council simulation resumed. This exercise involved a diplomatic dispute between two alien species over shared resources. Normally, Talaris would have approached the simulation with logic, applying established protocols to prevent escalation. Elena, however, did something different. She asked questions, not accusatory questions, but subtle ones that revealed underlying concerns, fears, and motivations of each species. She guided the resolution without imposing, without coercion. The simulation ended successfully. But more importantly, it revealed a truth that Talaris could not ignore. Humans were not weak, impulsive, or naive. They were intelligent in ways his people had not fully understood. Afterward, Talaris and Elena walked through the observation corridor. Stars streaked by in silent procession. The silence between them was comfortable, yet loaded with unspoken understanding. "You seem afraid," Elena said softly. Talaris frowned. "Afraid? Yes," she replied. "Not of me, not of this mission, but of change, of what cannot be controlled. Your species fears unpredictability, but sometimes fear itself is the obstacle." He stopped, staring at her. Her words were gentle, not a rebuke, but they cut deeper than any insult could. She had pierced his carefully maintained walls. He had always believed that control equaled safety, yet she was teaching him something far more difficult. That strength could exist without domination. That courage could exist without certainty. "I do not know if I am ready," he admitted quietly, "to embrace unpredictability." Elena smiled faintly, placing a hand briefly on the railing near his. "You do not have to be ready, you only need to try. Sometimes, the first step is enough." Talaris felt a strange warmth in his chest. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, yet comforting. He had never allowed himself to feel such emotion in the presence of another. Humans were capable of connection in ways his species rarely permitted, and he was beginning to understand why. The evening brought another unexpected challenge. The communications system reported a minor logistical issue that could affect the council meeting. Normally, Talaris would have handled it with strict protocol and delegation. Elena, however, proposed a different approach. "Let me help," she said calmly. "We can solve this together. Rules alone may not suffice." He hesitated. Allowing her to intervene felt risky, almost reckless, but something inside him urged trust. He stepped aside. Together, they resolved the issue efficiently, blending logic and creativity, protocol and intuition. Afterward, Talaris realized he had learned more in one afternoon than in years of training. Elena had not merely solved a problem, she had shown him the value of human ingenuity, empathy, and adaptability. These were not traits his species measured. They were unquantifiable, yet powerful beyond measure. Later, Talaris returned to the observation deck. The stars stretched infinitely, silent witnesses to his internal conflict. He had spent his life in certainty, yet now he faced a reality that challenged everything he believed. Elena Marrow was not just a bride assigned for political purposes. She was a human being, intelligent, perceptive, capable, and she was changing him. He thought of the council, of the galaxy, of the delicate alliance dependent on this union. Elena's presence was a test, but not in the way the council intended. The test was not for her. It was for him. Could he accept a different kind of strength? Could he embrace unpredictability without fear? Could he allow humanity's qualities, adaptability, empathy, courage to reshape his own worldview? He did not have an answer. But for the first time in decades, he felt the stirrings of something new. Possibility. And with possibility came fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of feeling something he could not measure or predict. fear of change itself. Yet, intertwined with that fear, there was also something else. Anticipation. The anticipation of learning, of growing, of experiencing a world he had never dared to imagine. And perhaps, most unsettling of all, the anticipation of caring for someone in a way he had never allowed himself before. Talaris stood alone in the observation deck, staring at the distant stars. He realized that the galaxy had underestimated humans, not because they were weak or emotional, but because they were capable of a strength that could not be confined, measured, or predicted. Elena Marrow had arrived expecting to fulfill a duty, a political obligation. Yet she had become a catalyst for transformation. She had shown him the power of quiet intelligence, empathy, and adaptability, the kind of strength his species rarely recognized in others. And Talaris Ven, trained to anticipate every variable, calculate every outcome, and control every situation, found himself confronting something entirely new. The possibility of change within himself, and the fear of what that change might mean. He returned to his quarters late, the hum of the cruiser a soft backdrop to his thoughts. He could not sleep easily. Elena's words, her presence, her quiet brilliance, filled his mind. He understood now that his duty was no longer just political. His duty was also personal. To see, to learn, and perhaps to embrace what humanity could offer not just to the galaxy, but to him. As he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his quarters, he made a silent promise. Tomorrow, he would continue to observe, to learn, and perhaps to take the first steps toward understanding humanity, not as a duty, but as a possibility. Because for the first time in his life, Talaris Ven understood that strength could exist without control, and courage without certainty. And that understanding was both terrifying and exhilarating. He did not yet know what the future held. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He could not turn away from what Elena Marrow had awakened in him. The stars outside the cruiser shone silently, stretching into infinity. A reminder that the universe was vast, unpredictable, and full of potential. And in that endless darkness, Talaris realized that the greatest lessons were not taught by tradition or protocol. They were revealed by those brave enough to live, observe, and adapt. Elena Marrow was teaching him more than diplomacy. She was teaching him humanity. The cruiser Serene Dawn drifted toward the council station, a massive structure orbiting a quiet, blue star. Talaris Ven stood on the observation deck, gazing at the vast expanse of space. Normally, he would have felt calm. Preparation and protocol always offered certainty. But now, Elena Marrow's presence lingered in his thoughts, filling every corner of his mind. He had expected a simple bride, someone who would follow procedure, obey instructions, and bring no surprises. Instead, Elena had shown him a different way of being: intelligent, perceptive, adaptable, and quietly fearless. She had challenged his assumptions, revealed the limitations of rigid logic, and awakened feelings he could not fully understand. Now, the time had come. The council awaited them. Every diplomat, every representative, would judge not only him, but the human species he represented. And more than that, the alliance depended on his composure, his decisions, and the impression he left. Elena approached, carrying her calm, measured confidence. She offered him a small, reassuring smile. "Ready?" she asked softly. Talaris hesitated. "I am prepared." The words felt hollow. Preparedness, he realized, was no longer just about protocol. It was about courage. Courage to face the unexpected. Courage to accept humanity's true nature. And courage to face his own emotions. She nodded, as if she understood more than he had spoken. Together, they moved toward the transport chamber, leaving the quiet hum of the cruiser behind. The council station was immense, a circular structure that shimmered with artificial light. Representatives from countless species waited in formal arrangements, their expressions unreadable. Talaris felt a tension in the room, a pressure he had never experienced so acutely. Every eye was on him and on the human who had come as a bride. As they entered, Talaris took a deep breath, feeling the weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. Elena followed, moving with quiet grace. She did not shrink, nor did she attempt to dominate. She simply existed, confident in herself, observing the room with calm curiosity. The council leader, an imposing figure with pale, translucent skin, spoke first. Ambassador Ven, we expect a smooth union. The human bride has been reported as compliant and agreeable. We trust these reports are accurate. Talaris's chest tightened. He knew he could not lie, and he did not wish to. Elena was no compliant figure. She was a human being, intelligent, adaptable, and independent. And yet, that independence, that quiet strength, was exactly what made her exceptional. She is more than reports suggest, Talaris said carefully. She is capable, perceptive, and strong in ways our previous data could not fully capture. A murmur ran through the council. Many seemed surprised, some skeptical. Elena smiled faintly, meeting their gazes without fear. She did not speak immediately, but the silence itself carried a message. Humanity's strength was not in obedience or ritual. It was in adaptability, perception, and the courage to act thoughtfully. The council presented a simulation of a potential interstellar conflict, a test of diplomacy and negotiation. Talaris had expected to handle it with logic, calculation, and protocol. Elena, however, approached it differently. She listened. She observed. She asked questions. Her questions were subtle, yet incisive. They revealed hidden motives, unspoken fears, and overlooked opportunities. The council members were forced to reconsider, to see beyond rigid rules and assumptions. Solutions emerged not through authority or intimidation, but through empathy, insight, and careful reasoning. By the end of the simulation, the room was silent. Then, one by one, council members nodded. Recognition, respect, and admiration replaced initial skepticism. Humanity had proven itself not by following rules, but by demonstrating a strength that was often invisible. The power of understanding, adaptation, and measured courage. Talaris watched Elena closely. She had done nothing extraordinary by the council's standards. Yet her actions had reshaped their perception entirely. And he felt a swelling of pride he had never experienced before. When the session concluded, the council leader turned to Talaris. Your human bride has exceeded expectations. You have brought more than a union. You have shown us the potential of your species. We acknowledge this, and we are grateful. Talaris nodded. It is not my doing. It is hers. Elena Marrow embodies qualities we are only beginning to understand. The council leader's gaze lingered on Elena. Indeed, perhaps the galaxy has underestimated humanity. Elena's smile was quiet, almost humble, yet it radiated confidence. Talaris felt a warmth in his chest, the same warmth that had accompanied fear and awe for days. She had not only proved humanity's value but had awakened something within him that he could no longer ignore. After the meeting, the council offered a private choice to Talaris. He could proceed with the formal union, or he could withdraw without penalty. It was a rare gesture, allowing him freedom to choose without obligation. Talaris retreated to a quiet chamber, alone with his thoughts. He thought of his species, of the rules that had guided him for decades, and of the expectations placed upon him. And he thought of Elena, the human who had entered his life expecting duty, yet had inspired transformation. He realized that this decision was no longer political, it was personal. To accept her fully would mean embracing uncertainty, acknowledging emotions, and stepping beyond the rigid boundaries of his upbringing. To refuse would be safe, logical, and predictable, but it would deny the very lessons he had learned. Elena entered quietly. She did not speak at first, allowing him space. Then she said softly, "You do not have to decide now. But remember, choice is a strength, not a weakness." Talaris looked at her. In her calm eyes, he saw not just intelligence, but trust, respect, courage, and perhaps something he had never allowed himself to feel: connection. "I do not know what I feel," he admitted. "This is unfamiliar." "Then start there," she said gently. "Start with what is real. You do not need certainty to begin." Talaris took a deep breath, feeling the weight of tradition, duty, and expectation. And yet, he felt something stronger: admiration, respect, and a quiet, growing care for the human before him. He realized that what she offered was not obedience or predictability. It was partnership, and partnership required trust, courage, and openness. "I choose to move forward," he said finally, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Not out of obligation, but because I wish to understand, to learn, and to grow." Elena's smile was radiant, yet gentle. She extended her hand, and he took it, feeling the warmth of her presence and the depth of her humanity. In that simple gesture, Talaris understood something profound. Strength was not in control alone. Strength was in connection, understanding, and the courage to embrace the unknown. The council formally acknowledged their union, not merely as a political arrangement, but as a symbol of humanity's quiet strength, adaptability, and courage. And for Talaris Ven, it was more than that. It was the beginning of a personal transformation, a recognition that his life and the galaxy could be richer, deeper, and more profound than he had ever imagined. As they left the council station, Elena beside him, Talaris felt a sense of peace he had never known. The stars stretched infinitely around them, vast and unpredictable, yet beautiful. Humanity had shown its worth, not through domination or aggression, but through empathy, insight, and the courage to act wisely. And Talaris Ven, once a man of rigid control and unwavering certainty, felt something entirely new: hope, wonder, and the quiet joy of seeing the universe through human eyes. Elena turned to him, her expression calm and confident. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, "and now I am ready to see where it leads." Together, they looked out at the endless stars, aware that the galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and full of potential. And in that infinite expanse, they understood something that few others had realized. Humans were not to be underestimated. Their strength was quiet, unassuming, yet unstoppable. The galaxy had expected obedience. They had expected simplicity. What they had not expected was humanity. And for Talaris Ven, that was the most extraordinary lesson of all.